These are some of Disney's most submechanophobia-inducing props and animatronics. This video is a compilation of some of our most popular past videos. We'll be attending D23 this week, and we didn't want to leave you without a video this week. So here's this compilation so you can watch these terrifying animatronics again, or even watch it before you sleep if you dare.
We're going to be ranking these attractions and animatronics by how big they are, how scary they are, and of course the actual status of the attraction. Jungle Cruise animals. The Jungle Cruise was one of Disneyland's opening day attractions back in 1955. Creating this attraction was a great challenge because of the budget Disney had for it and the technological advances they had at the time. At first, the attraction was supposed to have real live animals, but after Imagineers realized that the animals would likely sleep all day and be very hard to maintain, these plans were abandoned. To solve this, Walt got inspiration from the giant squid that Disney had created for the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea movie back in 1954. Yep, that giant, amazing, and terrifying thing. Just imagine swimming near that thing. So, drawing inspiration from this, Imagineers created these mechanical animals. These animals were not audio animatronics, of course, since they had not been invented yet. They were previous technology that allowed these figures to have basic movements. In 1962, it was renovated for the first time, adding more submerged figures and new scenes like the Indian elephant bathing pool. And then in 1964, animatronics were added in new scenes like the rhinoceros chasing explorers up a pole scene. Disney kept adding scenes, and by 1976, there were 31 new animatronics in the attraction. The Jungle Cruise was also opened at Walt Disney World in 1971, Tokyo Disneyland in 1983, and Hong Kong Disneyland in 2005. While this attraction has lots of submerged animatronics like crocodiles, hippos, and elephants, we placed it in last place because, after all, they're just animals, so they're not that scary if you look at them that way. But still, this cute, partially submerged elephant can cause some discomfort among people who experience submechanophobia. The most perturbing thing about all of this is seeing how the animatronics work when the water is clear. This is a pretty creepy spectacle. Discovery Riverboat's Iguanodon. We've talked about Discovery Riverboats non-stop in this channel, but if you haven't come across it and want to know more about the history of this attraction, check out this video. But long story short, this attraction was a huge mess since the beginning. This was because the attraction was completely improvised, and the original plans for it were never completed because of the budget and many other issues. The attraction was supposed to be full of mythological animals like unicorns, a kraken, which would have terrified anyone with the phobia, and even a dragon just like the one we find at the Disneyland Paris castle. But these plans were sadly dropped when Michael Eisner decided to create a huge and expensive Iguanodon animatronic to get people excited for the new dinosaur movie. Discovery Riverboats was a disaster, and this caused it to be revamped a few years after it opened and then permanently closed. Still, the Iguanodon animatronic was equally impressive and terrifying. We could see the huge animatronic partially submerged in the river's waters. Watching its fluid movements in the water was certainly imposing. But what makes this animal animatronic creepier than the Jungle Cruise animatronics? Well, over time, this animatronic started wearing out and even came to a point where it had some inside mechanisms exposed. This didn't last long because it was retired from the attraction and taken to the Disneyland Paris Studio Tram Tour, where it remained abandoned in an awful state. Guests could only see pieces of a headless and armless animatronic. The Iguanodon stayed that way for many years until it was retired without notice, and it won't be coming back, since the tram tour closed to make way for the park's new Galaxy's Edge and Arendelle lands. Discovery Riverboats might not have been the best attraction in Disney's history, or even a good one. But Aladar didn't deserve that destiny. The Mysteries of the Nautilus. We've talked a lot about Disney's long relationship with Jules Verne-inspired attractions, so it's not surprising that we're doing it again. When Disneyland Paris was being developed, Tony Baxter was named creative director, and one of the jobs that he had to do was create a new concept for the park's Tomorrowland. Baxter found this task exciting because to do it, he wanted to take inspiration in the previously canceled Disneyland land, Discovery Bay. Discovery Bay would have been a steampunk port city with many Jules Verne-inspired attractions. Check out this video if you want to know more about this land. So, using the concept of Discovery Bay, he created Discoveryland. Discoveryland is a gleaming golden seaside port that represents the future, but as it was envisioned by the past, a tomorrow that H.G. Wells, Leonardo da Vinci, and of course Jules Verne might have imagined. This land has many attractions, but there's one unique attraction that we can't find in any other Disney park in the world: the Mysteries of the Nautilus. This walkthrough attraction takes us inside the Nautilus, where we can explore its many rooms, including Captain Nemo's room. All of this while simulating that we're deep in the ocean. The best room in all of this attraction is the main salon. This is the heart of the Nautilus. Books, artifacts, and numerous treasures of the sea are gathered here. Just at the center of the room, there are 2 closed windows that look out at the ocean. One of these windows opens up every little while so that we can appreciate the depths of the sea, which is pretty scary in itself. But suddenly, a giant squid starts attacking the Nautilus. The defense mechanisms activate and succeed in scaring the giant beast away. This animatronic has very fluid tentacle and mouth movements and 2 enormous red eyes that, along with the light and bubble effects, make this encounter pretty impressive and terrifying at the same time. The animatronic is about 15 feet long and is completely submerged in water, making it seem like it's a real squid attacking us under the sea. So, of course, we needed to put this one high on the list, because not only is it a submerged animatronic, but it also seems more threatening than the ones before on account of the attack, not to mention its size and scary appearance. Sadly, due to technical problems, this scene was shortened. Nowadays, the animatronic is in B mode, so it doesn't move as much as it used to. There are no current plans for fixing it, but hopefully, Disney will do it soon and return it to its former glory so it can continue scaring us. Submarine Voyage. In 1959, Tomorrowland had its first major expansion. This expansion included the Matterhorn, an expanded version of Autopia, the Disneyland monorail, the motorboat cruise, and the submarine voyage. This attraction opened on June 14, 1959, as one of the first rides to require an e-ticket. This attraction is number 3 on the list because it is full of different scenes filled with props and animatronics throughout the ride. In the first part of the ride, we can find a giant clam, sea turtles, eels, crabs battling lobsters, and some other sea animals. The next scene is nightmare fuel. We get to a place that's full of different shipwrecks and sharks, but this is only the beginning. Next, we reach the North Pole, when suddenly, the sonar detects a polar ice cap that forces the submarine to go down into the depths of the ocean, where we find ourselves in total darkness, surrounded by strange creatures. One of these creatures is a terrifying giant squid. This scene, in our opinion, is the creepiest of all. The squid's size, combined with the movement and the dark ambiance, is imposing and scary. Also, in this scene we find many other creatures that can change color at will. The ride continues, and while we're moving, we find some mermaids swimming along with us. All seems well, and apparently we won't be suffering anymore. But then, the submarine takes us into the lost city of Atlantis. We are surrounded by building ruins, statues, and a suspicious giant tail. We continue our way until we're face to face with a giant sea serpent. This figure might not look scary and even has a comical appearance, but that doesn't mean the size of the character and the fact that it's completely submerged doesn't cause some chills. On September 7th, 1998, Submarine Voyage closed forever and remained abandoned for 7 years. Several projects were rumored to be planned for the abandoned attraction, but nothing was carried out. Then, in 2005, the lagoon was drained. The animatronic sea serpent was removed and auctioned off at the Van Eaton Gallery's auction that's from Disneyland years later. In 2007, Finding Nemo's Submarine Voyage was opened. This attraction is very similar, but a lot more friendly. Using the newest technology at the time, the characters are projected in the scenes. While the attraction is friendlier, it doesn't mean that people with submechanophobia will not feel a little uncomfortable with scenes like the one with the jellyfish or the encounter with the anglerfish. This attraction is so high on the list because it has lots of scenes, figures, and combines 2 phobias: submechanophobia and thalassophobia. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. When Imagineers were planning the Florida project, or what would be known as Disney World, they were deciding which attractions would open at the park by looking at Disneyland's attractions and choosing which of these they would duplicate at the new park. One of these attractions would be the popular e-ticket attraction Submarine Voyage. The project was given to Disney legend Claude Coates and his young Imagineer apprentice Tony Baxter, and they decided to mix Submarine Voyage with an old, also popular Disneyland attraction. Back when Disneyland opened, Walt wasn't completely satisfied with how Tomorrowland had turned out. So he decided to open a walkthrough attraction based on the Walt Disney Productions blockbuster hit film 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. He shipped the movie's sets to Anaheim, and the attraction was a huge success. So Imagineers took the submarine voyage concept and the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea themed exhibit and created a whole new and fantastic attraction. The redesigned ride changed from a scientific journey to a fantasy one, adding key scenes from the movie to it and creating the subs to mimic the look of Harper Goff's iconic Nautilus instead of the submarines at Disneyland. And 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea became one of the most loved attractions in Disney World's history. But while it was an amazing journey, it definitely was a nightmare for people who suffer submechanophobia. The ride not only simulated a deep dive into the sea's depths, sometimes surrounded by darkness, but it also showed guests a lot of animatronics and ruins while playing an eerie organ version of the film's main theme on loop. The ride was very similar to Submarine Voyage. It began in the underwater plains around Vulcania, where guests could see many sea animals that could cause some discomfort if you had the phobia, but were not very scary. During this part of the ride, divers would come into view, and we could see them working on kelp beds and wrangling with rebellious turtles. But again, nothing to be scared of. But then, a surface storm began, and the captain would order the submarine down into the depths as a precaution. Within minutes, the devastation such natural phenomena can create was made clear with the ominous graveyard of lost ships, with shipwrecks from various centuries littering the seabed, guarded by sharks. These shipwrecks were utterly terrifying, especially while paired with the music and the darkness that surrounds the submarine. Next, the submarine reached the North Pole, where it would go through a collection of large icebergs and then into the abyss, where guests viewed examples of the many weird and strange species of deepwater fish that thrive in such an environment. The ride seems to be getting scarier with each scene, but what came next is the most terrifying part. We entered the ruins of Atlantis. We find ourselves surrounded by ancient ruins and destroyed statues. And then, we begin seeing a hint of what lies ahead. A huge sea serpent surrounded by mermaids is guarding a treasure, bursting with jewels and gold. If this wasn't creepy enough for you, we begin experiencing turbulence caused by the volcano that submerged Atlantis all those years ago. The captain decides to go back to the surface, but before we're able to, we make an eerie discovery. Another Nautilus, trapped in the clutches of what appears to be a giant squid, who noticed us and began to attack us with its long, thrashing tentacles. Thankfully, we're able to escape this attack and return to the surface safely. What's even more terrifying about this attraction is that it sadly had to be closed down. It remained abandoned for 2 years until early 1996, when Disney officially announced that the attraction was not coming back. The submarines were removed, but the sets and animatronics remained abandoned underwater for 10 years until 2004, when the lagoon was drained and the animatronics and sets were exposed. Of course, they had a lot of water damage, and sadly, almost nothing could be salvaged. So you can imagine why this attraction was so high on the list. Not only did it prove to be terrifying and one of the reasons why so many people developed submechanophobia in the first place, but it also became scarier when it was abandoned, with all the submerged animatronics and sets slowly left to rot underwater. Which brings us to our next and final point. Castaway Cay. The story of Castaway Cay begins with Treasure Cay and its abandoned cruise ship. Back in 1989, Premier Cruise Line started a partnership with Disney to create the first Disney-themed cruise. This cruise offered guests a unique experience where they could meet and interact with Disney characters aboard the ship and also visit an island called Treasure Cay. The project was going great at first, but the bay near the development was too shallow for the cruise ships to get to the island. Premier Cruise Lines had to build a special canal so their smallest ship could fit. But when the demand started rising, it was easier to take guests to Nassau instead of Treasure Cay. So sadly, the island was abandoned entirely. Premier Cruise Lines went bankrupt and sold all of its fleets. They sold their Disney cruise, and the ship became the Ocean Dream. The ship's story is also tragic because it ended up abandoned at the ocean by the owners for a year on Thailand's east coast until it finally sank in February of 2016. While all this was happening, Disney ended its contract with Premier Cruise Line so they could create their own cruise line. They were offered a chance to buy Treasure Cay, but decided not to. Instead, they purchased their current island called Castaway Cay, and by 1998, debuted their first cruise ship called Disney Magic. Among the many activities that guests are offered at Castaway Cay is an area known as the Snorkeling Lagoon. And while this activity is not terrifying for everyone, for people who have submechanophobia, it can be pretty disturbing. In this activity, guests can find sunken treasures. There are a number of unique sunken treasures scattered around the snorkeling lagoon, and the majority of the items are marked with buoys. In the orange buoys, you can find a small submarine, a large anchor, and a fishing boat. Then, there are the white buoys, which is where we find the best treasures. The first one is a submerged statue of Minnie Mouse, sitting. The statue is obviously worn out by the sea, but you can swim around her. If you continue swimming, you can find another submerged statue. This time, the statue is of Mickey Mouse. This statue can be found in one of the farthest points of the activity, and only advanced swimmers can reach it. But if you think these two are creepy, wait until you see what's next. If you go even further, you will find a submerged Nautilus submarine, surrounded by sand and fish. You might wonder, how did this submarine get here? Well, in the previous point, we talked about how the 20,000 Leagues ride closed at Walt Disney World, and many of the props and animatronics were abandoned and destroyed. When the ride closed, the fleet of 12 submarines was abandoned as well, until they were removed. Some of them ended up at the Disney junkyard, others were dismantled for parts and sold on eBay. But 2 of Captain Nemo's submarines were saved and taken to Castaway Cay. Out of these 2 submarines, only one remains, the one we see at the snorkeling lagoon. The other one was sadly removed due to poor conditions. This ended up being number 1 because it is the only one that lets us experience submechanophobia firsthand. We're swimming near and around these abandoned objects and not going on a simulated adventure. So being able to live this is surely an exciting and terrifying experience.
Flotsam and Jetsam, Fantasmic, Disneyland. Fantasmic is arguably the best nighttime show that Disney has ever created. Since it opened in Disneyland back in 1992, it has been recreated for Walt Disney World and Tokyo Disney Sea. And even though each version of the show has its differences, they are all special in their own way. The show has been updated numerous times, and one of these times was during the Summer Night-tastic event that was celebrated at Disneyland back in 2009. This was an event that celebrated the park's nighttime entertainment, like an updated version of Disney's Electrical Parade in California Adventure, the new Magical Fireworks Show, and of course, an updated version of Fantasmic. One of the things that Fantasmic got during this update was the addition of Flotsam and Jetsam. They joined Ursula in her mission to destroy Mickey and appeared slithering along the rivers of America. These creatures were created by Michael Curry, a longtime Disney collaborator. He decided that the puppets should give a sense of swimming and menacing serpentine motion. After all, The Little Mermaid is an underwater movie, so it made sense to use water as a stage. To tackle the task of bringing Flotsam and Jetsam to life, Curry and his crew employed an eel puppet mounted on top of a nimble, high-performance jet ski. They were designed so that they could be brought to life by puppeteers, and the jet skis they are mounted on could operate in manual or automatic mode, depending on the physical demands placed on the driver and puppeteer. These 2 eels were very impressive and equally terrifying. They swam slowly but menacingly through the rivers of America. But sadly, while visually impressive, Flotsam and Jetsam didn't work out so well. Having difficulty seeing, the drivers were said to often run into things along the river, including each other. And just as the Ursula float before them, they also didn't last more than a few summers before being removed. We find both of these puppets to be pretty impressive and terrifying at the same time, and we would have placed them higher on the list. But as we said before, this time around, we rank this list based on your answers, and you place Flotsam and Jetsam at the end of our list. So, let's see who's next. Formerly known as Rainbow Caverns Mine Train, from 1956 to 1959, Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland opened on May 28, 1960. This attraction featured a train that took guests through Bear Country, Beaver Valley, the Living Desert, and Rainbow Caverns, where you could see mighty waterfalls cascading off of Cascade Peak, beavers building a dam, brown bears swimming and resting, cacti resembling humans, balancing rocks, the devil's paint pots, which were bubbling pots of mud in all kinds of colors, geysers shooting water high into the desert air, and the famous colorful glowing waterfalls inside Rainbow Caverns. One of the best parts of this attraction was that it was full of animatronics. In fact, the attraction had a little over 200 animated animals, all in their natural habitats. This in itself doesn't sound scary, but just as with the Jungle Cruise animatronics, many of these animals could be seen inside the water. There were 2 main scenes that would terrify anyone that suffered from submechanophobia. The first was Beaver Valley. Here, guests riding the train could see some beavers building a dam in the river. The train continued and entered Bear Country. Here, there were lots of brown bears resting, stretching their backs on trees, and swimming. That's right, there were some bears submerged in water swimming and hunting for fish. The bears move around inside the water, and some of them even went underwater. This was a pretty scary sight to see if you suffer from submechanophobia. Still, these animals are pretty cute, and that's probably why you guys rank them in 9th place. Ursula, Phantasmic. Phantasmic is going to be featured more than once on this list. We've already mentioned Flotsam and Jetsam, but how about Ursula? That's right. Nowadays, the only way that Ursula appears during Phantasmic is as a projection. But this was not always the case. Back in 1992, when Phantasmic debuted, Ursula appeared moving around the rivers of America on top of a big barge, moving her arms and mouth supposedly synchronized with the music. But that hardly ever happened. Ursula was very creepy, and what made this barge so creepy was its size and movements. Because even if they weren't perfectly synchronized, Ursula's hand movements and tentacles were terrifying, and gave this scene huge production value. Sadly, as we said before, this character's effects didn't work as great as they should, and it was one of the first elements to be retired and changed on Phantasmic. It was unreliable, it barely worked, and it even broke down mid-show, sometimes bringing the entire show to a full stop. After she was retired, the barge remained abandoned in the rivers of America for a while, and no one knows what happened to it next. Ursula was very short-lived, but well-remembered by many guests, but still she didn't rank higher on this list. Monstro and the Cave of Wonders, Disneyland, Disneyland Paris. Storybook Land Canals is one of the cutest and most classic Disneyland attractions. This attraction opened at Disneyland as Canal Boats of the World, and was intended to be a journey past miniature recreations of the great landmarks of the world. But time and money prevented its completion. After 2 months in operation, it closed to be refurbished and became the Storybook Land Canals that we all know. The new ride included scaled models of guests' favorite movies like Mr. Toad, Cinderella, and the Three Little Pigs. But one of the biggest changes to the ride was the addition of Monstro, and incidentally, that's why this ride appears on this list. After departing from the dock, the boat passes through a short cave sculpted to look like Monstro, the whale that swallowed Pinocchio. Monstro is partially animated. His eye opens and closes, and periodically steam comes out of his blowhole. Many people with submechanophobia find this part of the attraction terrifying because even though Monstro is not an animatronic, the size and the concept of being swallowed by this huge whale is very scary for them. Not many people know this, but the idea of having Monstro the whale consume the canal boats came from a never implemented concept for a Monstro the whale ride, in which small boats were to be swallowed by Monstro and then plunge down a watery path into a pond below. So honestly, that could have been worse. Some people also find the whale's reflection in the water to be completely terrifying, and to be honest, we can completely understand that. The ride was also recreated at Disneyland Paris, where instead of being swallowed by Monstro, we enter the Cave of Wonders. The Cave of Wonders does not have any type of animation, but entering the dark cave has the same type of scary effect as the one at Disneyland with Monstro. This is one of our favorite rides in both parks, and while this scene can be pretty scary, we wouldn't have it made otherwise. Monstro and the Cave of Wonders were placed on number 7 on this list, which proves that they cause the same type of effect in lots of people. Prometeo Bravissimo, Tokyo Disney Sea. We've said it a million times before, but Tokyo Disney Sea is probably the best Disney park in the world. It has amazing lands, rides, and nighttime spectaculars. One of these amazing shows was Bravissimo. The nighttime spectacular told the love story between two elemental spirits, Prometeo, the fire spirit, and Bellicia, the water spirit, using a mixture of beautiful lights, water fountains, and fireworks that ended with the spirits falling in love and becoming united forever. We won't get into the show today. Instead, we're going to be focusing on Prometeo. This is because even though the show is beautiful and talks about a love story, Prometeo is a very imposing and terrifying spirit, and seeing him covered in fire while surrounded by water makes him worthy of being on this list. The creation of this huge spirit was a challenge because the structure alone has 40 flamethrowers. It was created by the very talented teams of Koichi Sasamoto, ECA2, and Ves Pepin, which are nighttime spectacular experts that have worked in shows like the 2004 Olympic Games inauguration or the nighttime Eiffel Tower show. After manufacturing, the show used Prometeo was tested for 2 months in water conditions and installed in a 6-meter pit, which was constructed in the Mediterranean Harbor Lagoon. At this stage, the crucial difficulties were ensuring that the electronics, flamethrowers, and fireworks could function even when underwater. Corsini also traveled to Japan, where he spent 1 month working out the lighting with the Japanese staff. due to the park remaining open during this time. Testing the light and water controls, as well as training the crew to use them, was conducted after the park closed each night at 11 p.m. The size of the show-used Prometeo was 14 meters tall and 32 meters wide. The Prometeo lighting rig consisted of 3,000 waterproof Japanese-made LEDs and 250 Burkett strobe lights, as well as 2 narrow spot PAR lamps for Prometeo's eyes. Because the Prometeo rig had to remain underwater all day, the strobe controllers were all encased in stainless steel, and the strobe cables were waterproof. Prometeo is one of the most impressive animatronic structures ever made, so it is astounding that not a lot of people know about this amazing show. Bravissimo was so complex that daily preparation for each performance began at 1 a.m., with 16 pyrotechnicians starting the installation of the 850 fireworks used in the show. Pyrotechnic installation concluded at 12 p.m. A total of 60 crew were trained for work on the show, of which 40 were actively involved in each performance. Each of the 4 fountain barges had a driver, while the chariot and Belicia barges each had a driver and a spotter. This was a stunning show, but sadly, it was retired on November 13th, 2010, to be replaced by Fantasmic. But this show deserves much more recognition. Brickley, Disney Springs. It's not possible to talk about Submechanophobia without mentioning 2 of the most famous underwater sea serpents that have ever existed. And if by any chance you don't know what we're talking about, check out our Submechanophobia video, part 1. However, there's a 3rd sea serpent that nobody really talks about. We're talking about Brickley, who we can find at Disney Springs. Brickley arrived at Disney Springs, formerly known as Downtown Disney, back in October 1997, when the LEGO Imagination Center opened. This huge sea serpent was built using more than 170,000 blocks, and it resided in Downtown Disney Lagoon. Brickley has a huge fan base and is a big favorite among Disney Springs guests, but for some other guests, it can be quite creepy. Although Brickley's design is very cute, it's still a very large semi-submerged snake that goes in and out of the water, giving people with submechanophobia nightmares. Brickley is so famous that LEGO has released several LEGO sets based on it, and they can be occasionally found in the store at Disney Springs. We're very happy that Brickley survived Disney Springs renovation. It has been around for 20 years, and we hope it will stay for many more. Still, we're very surprised that this snake was ranked so high on this list. TikTok, Fantasmic, Disneyland. Again, we're talking about Fantasmic and its many changes. We've seen Ursula, Flotsam, and Jetsam, but one of the characters that you found to be the most terrifying on this list was TikTok, the crocodile. In 2008, Fantasmic received another overhaul. This time, the 3 original 70mm projectors were replaced with the high-definition digital projectors. The animation also received a new digital transfer, and the Peter Pan sequence was given a new mechanical TikTok crocodile. Before this overhaul, TikTok appeared in the Peter Pan sequence, but this version was more like a big crocodile prop that followed the ship and had limited movement. The new TikTok was much better. This new mechanical barge could move its neck, had light-up eyes, and moving limbs and tail. This gave the character a sense of being alive, and made it a character in the scene, not a prop following a ship as it was before. But as we said before, Fantasmic has had lots of refurbishments and renovations, and the last of these refurbishments was in 2016. This time, the Peter Pan sequence was sadly removed, and replaced by a Pirates of the Caribbean scene. This means that TikTok the crocodile was completely retired and is now hopefully residing at the Walt Disney Archives. There were various rumors that said that the crocodile was removed after the tragic accident that happened at Walt Disney World in 2016, but this is not true. This was one of our favorite Fantasmic sequences, and we were sad to see it go. Decided that TikTok had to be number 4 on this list. And it makes sense because this huge animatronic looks pretty terrifying, especially when it was seen up close and moving along the river. Phantom Cruise Line, Disneyland Paris. We've talked about the abandoned Disneyland Paris Mark Twain before, and if you want to check out its story, you can watch this video. But today we're going to focus mainly on 2 especially creepy aspects of the troubled history of this riverboat. Disney has always been big on their Halloween celebrations, and Disneyland Paris is no exception. So back in 2003 and 2004, they created one of the most chilling experiences there has ever been in the park, the Phantom Cruise Line. During these seasons, the Mark Twain riverboat was turned into the Phantom Cruise Line. Imagineers decided to create a huge and terrifying specter, brought from our worst nightmares, and have it pull the boat across the rivers of the far west. The design alone of this Phantom was terrifying, but seeing it inside the river, pulling the boat, added a terror factor that people with submechanophobia couldn't handle. It might be terrifying, but it would have been something that we would have loved to experience. But sadly, because of many technical difficulties and even a derailment, which was probably one of the most terrifying things guests have ever seen, the Phantom Cruise Line did not come back in 2005, and it hasn't been seen ever since. Still, it seems like it left a trail of bad luck because the Mark Twain and the Molly Brown have suffered from a few accidents after this. In 2006, the Molly Brown's engine overheated. The smoke damaged the ship and the engines, and it remained out of operation for many months. That left the Mark Twain as the only riverboat in operation. The Molly Brown kept going into and out of refurbishment, while the Mark Twain kept working. Then in 2010, the Molly Brown had to be rebuilt from scratch, so the Mark Twain was the only boat that was operating. But then in 2011, the Mark Twain was used to break ice in the river, and it got stuck. Trying to free the boat, it was pulled, and this caused some damage to the bottom of the boat, and the whole deck was bent. This caused the Mark Twain to go into refurbishment right after the Molly Brown was done. Sadly, this refurbishment didn't come soon enough. The boat was stationed in the dry dock and was left there to rot. Some time passed, and Disney decided to build a kind of barn around the Mark Twain so guests couldn't see the bad condition that the boat was in. The Mark Twain had remained in dry dock, except when the Molly Brown had to go into refurbishment. During these periods of time, the boat is taken out and sometimes covered with a sheet so no one can see the state it's in. It is pretty sad to see how abandoned the boat has become. For a while, there were rumors that said that the Mark Twain was set to return this year, but this never happened. And sadly, in September, the Molly Brown had a small fire and had to be closed temporarily. We can only hope that these two riverboats return to their former glories. The Phantom Cruise Line is number 3 on this list because it is so creepy, and seeing it move across the river is visually terrifying. Maelstrom, Nokken. The Norwegian Pavilion was the last to be open at Epcot, and for this pavilion, the new ride was being planned. This ride was called Sea Venture and was supposed to be a journey through mystical lands and trolls that would finish with a rainbow bridge to Valhalla. Norwegian sponsored wanted something different, so the ride changed and became Maelstrom. This ride opened on July 5th, 1988. It was a mix of flume and dark ride. It took guests through mythological scenes of Norwegian history. The ride had lots of cool and also scary animatronics. So let's take a look at what makes it a part of this list. In one of the ride scenes, the boats took us to a swamp where we would come face to face with two very upset creatures. One of these was a large three-headed troll that became angered by our intrusion into troll country and proceeded to cast a spell, banishing us from the swamp. While this huge troll was pretty intimidating, we find that the creepiest animatronic in this scene was a submerged creature we could find in front of the boat. This creature is Nokken, and this particular Nokken was huge. What makes this creature more terrifying is its enormous eyes that appear to be watching us and blinking underwater. This was an awesome scene that used lots of effects like lighting or scents to make guests feel like they were really in a swamp. The trolls then banished us by moving our boat backward, over the falls, but not before we encountered a bigger and more terrifying Nokken animatronic. On September 12, 2014, it was announced that the ride would be replaced by Frozen Ever After. And after the ride closed, these animatronics were retired, and we sadly don't know where most of them ended up. While the Nokken might not look very scary, and people might even find it cute, the fact that it is submerged and even goes underwater once in a while makes it so terrifying for people who suffer submechanophobia. And we're not even taking into consideration that Nokkens in Scandinavian mythology are described as water spirits who played enchanted songs on the violin, luring women and children to drown in lakes or streams. So that makes this animatronic so much scarier. Now it's finally time to take a look at your number 1 pick for scariest submerged animatronic. Anglerfish, Nemo Submarine Voyage. On our first Submechanophobia video, we talked about 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Submarine Voyage, but we did not go into the ride that replaced Submarine Voyage. On September 7, 1998, Submarine Voyage closed forever and remained abandoned for 7 years. Several projects were rumored to be planned for the abandoned attraction, but nothing was carried out. Then, in 2005, the lagoon was drained. In 2007, Finding Nemo's Submarine Voyage was open. This attraction is very similar, but a lot more friendly, using the newest technology at the time. The characters are projected in the scenes. While the attraction is friendlier, it doesn't mean that people with submechanophobia will not feel a little uncomfortable. This ride is full of creepy scenes, but the creepiest one is probably the anglerfish scene. In this scene, we go through a submarine surrounded by World War II mines. Our submarine hits a mine, causing the mine to explode, resulting in the sub shaking and temporarily losing power. As the sub goes dark, Marlin and Dory are surrounded by small glowing lights, which turn out to be phosphorescent lights on several huge deep-sea anglerfish. This is maybe one of the creepiest scenes at the park, since it mixes darkness with claustrophobia and submechanophobia. This scene only lasts a few seconds, but that's enough to produce nightmares for people who have this phobia. But if you think that experiencing these few seconds in the ride is terrifying, imagine having to actually swim near it. That's what people who work as machinist scuba divers do at Disney parks. This is one of the rarest and most interesting jobs at the parks. Most of it is underwater. They have to fix and give maintenance to the rides that are exposed to water, like Submarine Voyage, Splash Mountain, Pirates of the Caribbean, and Jungle Cruise. Some of the daily tasks that cast members like Thaw himself have to do is give maintenance to the submarines and the props on this attraction. The most intriguing part of this job is that it is all underwater, of course, and it has to be done at night. To be able to do this task, 2 divers are needed. One of them does all the maintenance work, and the other watches out for the diver that is doing the maintenance so that they don't run any risk by checking that oxygen tanks are full or that they do not get stuck in the props or other difficulties. While this is a fascinating job, it would be an absolute nightmare for anyone who has submechanophobia, as these divers are exposed daily to submerged animatronics and props. And just imagine swimming next to that anglerfish. You guys picked the anglerfish as the scariest underwater prop on this list, and rightfully so, because it is absolutely terrifying. What do you think? After watching the video, would you change anything on the list? Let us know in the comments. If you want to check out some of the animatronics and props from this list, you can start planning your next magical vacation with our friends from PixieVacations.com. They will help you plan your perfect vacation to any Disney or Universal park, specifically tailored to your vacation style and budget. And working with a Pixie is completely free. So talk with them to make the best out of your next vacation. See you next time.